Hello and welcome back to the shop. Ever since childhood I've loved single seat open wheel roadsters, especially racing cars. There's something about them that's always very much appealed to me. But as I've explained in previous videos, I don't really tend to drive my road cars very much. I drive the off-road ones much more. But these are road cars, these little racing cars, aren't they? Actually, I found lots of photos that suggest that they used to be raced off-road as well. I entered into negotiations with the owner of this one, and I'm delighted to report that I was able to buy it. In fact, it's on its way here right now. And in fact, it has arrived. I'm really pleased with it. Let's have a closer look. Been beautifully made in steel. It's going to be difficult to fit a driver figure in without making some sort of modifications to that dash. And the wheelbase is tremendously long. But before we get ahead of ourselves considering the practicalities of an RC conversion, let's take a look underneath. As you can see, it doesn't have a chassis. Instead, it has a Volkswagen type solid steel floor pan to which the suspension is attached. Obviously these are non-functioning leaves, but I think it's appropriate that it should have leaf springs, and when I RC it, I would very much like to make sure that it does. The images I've been able to find of these vehicles being used off-road in period suggests that they don't have a great deal of suspension travel. As for how I'm going to carry out the RC conversion, well, I do have a plan. After all, what I need to do now is to buy a transmitter, a receiver, a speed controller, motor, gearbox, chassis, leaf springs, axles, and some sort of drivetrain. What's the quickest and easiest way to do that? As this channel operates on a tight budget, there was only really ever one answer. The WPL C94. Now this solution isn't without its complications. For one thing, the steel car is very heavy and the C94 is softly sprung. That could be an issue. I included that last shot of the red car so that you can see how low slung it is. I'd like to keep it relatively low, so if the suspensions completely collapse, perhaps it'll operate on a droop setup. Okay, off camera I'm going to check that this thing works, and if it does, then I'll remove the body. There you go. No sooner said than done. Let's compare it to the other one. There. In terms of wheelbase, it's sort of one wheel longer, isn't it? Hopefully that shouldn't be too difficult to deal with. Obviously we need to keep the rear spring hangers, so I propose to cut this chassis around here. Then and only then will I worry about what to do next. But first, it's time to get the old clutter off the underside of this thing. Those fake leaf springs, they're dumb irons, all that has to go. You know what that means? It's Dremel time. There you go. It's practically finished. Experience has taught me to put the Dremel down. I was enjoying myself and I wanted to carry on cutting. I wanted to cut these chassis dumb irons off because they will be replaced by the genuine dumb irons of the working chassis. They do need to come off. But first I thought I ought to ask myself what we're doing about mudguards. Are we keeping them? Because this is a model of a car with, I think, cycle wings, wings that go up and down, wings we used to call them in England years ago, that go up and down with the wheel as it moves. And I can't decide whether to do that or whether just to cut them off and be done with them. And that's what I meant about the teachings of experience. I put the Dremel down and I'm going to have a cup of tea and think before I go any further. I've been simplifying the C94. As you can see, the rear bumper has gone, and now when I offer up the car body to the back, it looks about right. Let me show you. It would of course sit a little lower than that, although we do need all that amount of articulation actually. However, the story isn't so rosy at the front. I've cut away some chunks that were here, which would have protruded up through the floor. But the big problem is the steering servo. You can see that it's right on the front, and if I lower the front of the car into position, you can see that the steering servo comes in front of the lights. That won't do. So my next job is to relocate it. I'm hoping that won't be too challenging. Whenever I'm in a supermarket and I see a cheap plastic chopping board, I tend to buy it, because it's handy to have chunks of HDPE of varying thicknesses. So I think I'm going to have to cut a servo mount from a chunk of chopping board and install it here with the servo arm facing forward rather than backwards as it currently does. Further investigation shows that these are simply too thin. This is the thicker of the two, and that's too thin for me to work with. So I've raided my knife making drawer, which is also full of chopping boards, but these ones are made of wood. I buy these if they have an attractive grain to make the handles for the knives, but this is much thicker, so we're going to have a wooden servo mount. I haven't tested this yet. Let's see. I'm sure the servo will work, but we're looking for binding or other difficulties. Oh, it's back to front. That's to be expected. It seems fine at this deflection. Let's try with the suspension halfway deflected. Excellent. I think that was more luck than judgment, to be frank. That's good. Now that the servo's out of the way, I can proceed. And in this sense, proceeding means cutting a big hole in the bottom of the metal body. Proceeding will also soon mean cutting the chassis in half here. Cutting this hole in the underside has made all the difference. The electronics fit comfortably inside, and now the steering servo can sit just in front of the radiator grille but behind the lights. That was good because it got the body down onto the chassis and we're nicely lined up. However, the next thing we have to do is a bit more drastic and bold. It's time to cut the chassis. Now, I know I just said that the next job would be to cut the chassis in half, but I've discovered a minor complication. When I moved the steering servo back in the chassis, I inadvertently placed it directly above the diff pumpkin, and now I've heavily compromised axle articulation up front. That's no good. Thankfully, WPL have me covered. They very cleverly designed their axles so that they can be flipped. I can take them off and turn them over so the diff pumpkin is on the other side and won't foul the steering servo. There's a minor disadvantage associated with employing this technique, which is simply that the front axle will now rotate in the wrong direction. To keep my wheels all going the same way, I'm going to have to flip the rear axle as well. I think I'll get on and get that done before I start hacking the chassis to bits. Here it is with both axles flipped upside down. The back one was very straightforward, the front was a bit more involved because of all the steering bits and bobs. But it all happened quite quickly and easily. And full axle articulation has been restored to us as the pumpkin no longer fouls the steering servo. So with that hurdle out of the way, now it really is time to cut the chassis in half. Right, I did it. The two halves of the chassis. For now, what I intend to do is to mount the rear half directly to the underside, like that. I can take advantage of these two holes and I can drill a hole or two in this. I've successfully bolted the back bit on. That's a big gap, isn't it? It's 132 millimeters. I think that's about 5 inches, a bit over. The front is not yet secured, and securing the front is going to be more challenging. By offering up the front, I've seen that I need to cut away this part which will accommodate the gearbox. I know this image is messy with all the electronics and therefore difficult to understand, but if I lift this up, you can see how now the gearbox sits snugly into there, and we've got the front down a little bit. Let's hope I can do the same with the back, because it is still quite tall, though I can't lower it much if I want to keep full articulation. Progress has been made. I've drilled and tapped lots of holes and made these rather complicated looking brackets, which are doing a sterling job of securing everything at the back. I haven't yet come up with a way of mounting the front, and I need to find a way to accommodate all the electronics and things inside. And to that end, I have cut and hinged a little panel here. Very basic, one hobby hinge from Amazon. For the first time, I've got both the front and the back fitted. This is so I can think about the drivetrain. As you can see, we've got quite a distance to go from the gearbox to the back axle. Let's turn the car upside down and get a better look. Note to American viewers, I'm going to keep forgetting and saying prop shafts. I know to you guys this is a drive shaft, but I grew up in England. So, I had hoped to use this magnificent prop shaft, which was a gift from my mate Dave. But that is a 2mm shaft, and Dave's prop shafts are positively gaping at 6mm. In contrast, the hole in the end of this prop shaft is a more modest 3mm, and I can make that work with a 2mm shaft. However, nothing in this size range is anything like long enough to reach that axle. And even if it were, I don't think it would be a good idea to have such a long unsupported drive shaft. There, I said drive shaft. So really we need to support our solution somewhere in or near the middle. And I have an idea for that. It's unconventional, but see what you think. This is a very cheap AliExpress, very strong single speed gearbox for a 180 motor. If I were to shorten that shaft and put that somewhere around there, in theory I could have one of these shortened and another of these suitably shortened. It's a thought, isn't it? By trimming away some excess material on the underside and using a couple of fiberglass tent pole pieces as spacers or standoffs, I've been able to mount this flat so I can scoot it around on the underside of the car and see where best to place it. It's an ordinary Sunday and I've come to a building site to take advantage of the fact that they're not working today, so I can play on their piles of gravel. But even as I'm playing here, I'm still thinking about what to do about the final drive on the maroon race car. The intermediate bearing idea isn't set in stone. It's perfectly possible that I might change my mind and fit a single long prop shaft. When I get home, I might just have a little look and see what's available. While I continue to agonise over the question of how to drive the rear axle, my mind skipped ahead to the next question, which is that of a driver figure. What options are available? These two men in sharp suits, a post-apocalyptic cyberpunk warrior queen and her sidekick Darius, this rather confused time-travelled Roman legionary, Professor Nick Cutter from the Welsh TV show Primeval, and an elderly friend. However, The problem is that whoever gets the privilege of driving this thing loses their legs. So we're not using any of them. What about this guy? This is a table football player like this that's been retrofitted with arms and more realistically proportioned legs. Another benefit of using this figure is that his head is exceedingly well attached to his torso, and with the huge weight of this all-steel body, when this thing goes rolling down a mountainside with that little guy's head sticking up, it's going to take a beating. I think he's probably a great deal stronger than an injection moulded posable action figure. I've used 2-part epoxy putty to sculpt some arms for our driver figure. He's propped this way up because I've just glued his right hand on, and I'm waiting for that glue to go off. He's got both hands on now, and with his face and neck masked off, he's ready to be painted. A quick image search of tinplate racers from the 1930s show that they're often vac-formed and shown wearing a beige-coloured dust coat. So, in homage to them, I've painted mine similarly. And there's good news! While I've been fiddling with the driver, I've come to a decision and bought this drive shaft from Endura. Earlier in this video I incorrectly said that the shaft coming out of a WPL gearbox or axle is 2mm in diameter. I was wrong, it's 3mm. But this is a whopping 5, so I've got some work to do to make it fit. I cut a stock one in half, and then I used a length of tent pole whose longitudinal central hole I had drilled out from 3 to 4.5mm to join the two halves. And guess what? It works perfectly. Which means that we have only to put the driver figure in and I was impressed by how well it went actually. The hugely long wheelbase didn't give us too terrible a ramp breakover angle because I raced it up pretty high. And yet it really wasn't all that roly-poly. To my surprise, my rear drive shaft never broke. It's still working now. Although the back axle did spit out its outermost bearing, that made the prop shaft come off. Or did the prop shaft come off and that caused the loss of the bearing? I don't know, I couldn't find the bearing, so I nipped home, grabbed another one, shoved it in, and then I made a little bodge. I drilled a 3mm hole in a piece of thick plastic and put it there as a spacer. And now the bush can't come out. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. That's it for today. Thanks very much for watching.